Okay, good afternoon, wherever you are. We have at least one person, John Braithwaite from Australia. It's almost midnight there. So good day, good afternoon, good evening. My name is David Levi-Faur, and I'm from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Probably you know me from this series. But I'm now in Vienna as a visiting professor at the CEU, a very excellent institution, and I'm very happy to have the term here in Vienna. So our webinar today is on the global retreat of the regulatory state and the populist challenges to the future of regulatory governance. The webinar is organized as a part of a series of webinars, but it came out into being when I read via blessed Google Scholar a new paper by my good colleagues and friends, Kutsal Yesilkagit from Leiden University, Ioannis Papadopoulos from the University of Lausanne, and Kerem Coban from the SOAS University of London, but also Kadir University in Turkey. I will kind of also moderate the webinar. I will not, maybe I will say a few introductory words, but also will comment later on. So at the center is the regulatory state, this kind of institutions that the concept came at least from the United States, but it's really alive here in Europe and making our life, as much as I can see, much better, richer economically, more protected from environmental, climate risks, and also when we speak about social and moral regulation, making this society fairer and more equal. So this regulatory state is now at the center of a take. There is this war on the regulatory state, and without overdoing the introduction, I will ask Professor Yesilkagit to present the paper, and his colleagues will continue after him. So please.
Yes, thank you very much, David, for giving us the opportunity, and also a very warm welcome to everyone present, also on behalf of Kerem and Ioannis. We are very happy that you're here and are willing to listen to our paper and hopefully enrich us with good feedback to continue on this paper. The direct motivation for this paper is, as David already mentioned, a structure and organization of government, a SOAS workshop that we organized in December 2023 in Istanbul on this topic. There we gathered a couple of scholars from all different regions to discuss the populist effects, or the effects of populism on regulatory authorities. And behind this question lies, of course, a broader, a more fundamental development that we are observing over the past couple of 10, 15 years, and that's the rise of populist, or maybe we can even speak of authoritarian tendencies in liberal democracies. One of the things that so the question that we have here is the global, does the regulatory state retreat, question mark, because it may not be gone very shortly, but it will be put under strain, both empirically in reality, as we see what happens in the US, especially now, which is the Trump government's direct attack on regulatory agencies. We see there President Trump's dismissing of heads of regulatory agencies which have been established originally by Congress as a means to protect regulatory policies from a too powerful executive. So there's really serious thing going on, but this is happening also in other parts of the world. And what this development does is two things for us. For us as well. First of all, it's a major development that may change the way we are. That may change the liberal democratic ways of governance, but it also will affect our theories of regulatory governance. And when I started, I'm a scholar. Speaking for myself, I'm a scholar of political administrative relationships. And for more than 100 years, since Max Weber, Woodrow Wilson, the most dominant liberal, the most dominant paradigm in the field was how can elected politicians control unelected bureaucrats. All our models, all our theories were on that. And regulatory agencies were a special case of this political control of the unelected bureaucracy. But now the question is no longer how bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats, can attack or weaken the foundations of liberal democracy, but they are elected politicians themselves. So it is both a societal challenge, a problem, an empirical problem. But the other side, this development also challenges our theoretical insights. Are theories of regulatory governance still viable? Are theories of political control of the bureaucracy, are they still viable in a time where liberal democracies are being challenged by populist politicians? So this is the major background of this of the work. And Ioannis, Kerem, and I, we came together because we all three have this kind of background and our common interest, and we set up this special this workshop. And as we speak, some of the colleagues who were there and some of them were not there are now writing on papers, and hopefully they will appear in a special issue of Governance, hopefully some period in 2026. Kerem, can you do that? I will share this, or Kerem will share his screen now and go to immediately to the first slide. Can you go to the first slide, please? Yeah. So the motivation is like this is the bigger picture, but and the challenging things are that regulatory governance is once or represents still a dominant model of governance. It's also in 2005 David's seminal article about the globalization of regulatory capitalism also heralded the model of regulatory governance as the most dominant model of the state. States were, after a decades-long period of direct providers of public services and owners of public corporations, they shifted in the 1980s to become a type of states that only issued rules and regulated rules, and so there is and this model has been there since the 1990s, and there are lots of studies of David and Yassine Jordana show that the spread of the regulatory authorities have been everywhere, and the whole idea was they relied on technocratic expertise and insulation. But with the populist ascendancy, the whole reliance on technocratic expertise and insulation becomes problematic. Populist movements, they politicize the bureaucracy, they politicize unelected, non-majoritarian organizations, and they delegitimize the whole foundation on which regulatory organization, regulatory governance is being founded. They do not see, we don't see that they abolish them, but they repurpose independent regulatory authorities. They make use, they try to turn them into controlled regulatory instances with which they can have a larger say, bigger say on the governance of the economy, building their own coalitions, their elite networks with friendly businesses and so on. So we and in this paper we want to show and look how populist government undermines the functioning, but also the theoretical underpinnings of this model. Next slide, please. So to go back to the origins, like I must say that the title and the whole framing of the paper is very much inspired by David's 2005 work, and it was also the challenging and the triggering thesis that he put there was directly also influencing our work, and it's almost low-hanging fruit to ask: is the global spread of regulatory state, is it still there? And is this vast delegation to independent regulatory agencies, rules-based oversight, and this massive diffusion of international diffusion of the regulatory model, is it still there? And there are, and the reason why the question comes up right now is that the regulatory governance model is against a number of populist assumptions, like its expertise versus partisan politics, its credible commitment against political discretion and political intervention in the economy, and it is institutional autonomy against majoritarian control. And these three contradictory logics, which were directly lying at the foundations of the regulatory state, are being against partisan politics, against political discretion in decision-making economy and majoritarian control. These three anti-regulation logics, so to speak, they come up ferociously under the populist ascendance. Next, please, slide. So what is this populist challenge then there? And there might be a lot of other points that we can mention. Well, there's also a challenge. Well, one is that, of course, populism is grounded in anti-elitism, and regulatory authorities, central banks, the highbrow regulators of all kinds of markets and products fall immediately in the elitist basket, the technocratic basket. Their populism is against the unelected bureaucrats. They are being portrayed as unaccountable, and they are obstructing popular sovereignty. And that's also what we now see very much in the US, where under the theory of the unitary executive, the conservative idea of an unbounded presidency, we see that exactly this model is being challenged under the label of that the presidential mandate will exceed the mandate of organizations established by Congress, and we are large. Like in the US, is also like we see this forging of new coalitions, the democratic backsliding of populism. Maybe that's not the best word if we want to go deeper into it and understand the differences between the different countries. What we see maybe is better explained as a change of elite constellations. And Trump in the US, it's this move towards the fossil fuel industry, which is, of course, against environmental regulation. And there is this alliances with the big tech industry, which also is anti-regulatory in essence. But in Hungary, in Poland, Turkey, we see differences. We see there build up of oligarchic coalitions. In Turkey, we see the secularist, Western-oriented big businesses being replaced by what's called the Anatolian tigers, the more conservative, the smaller businesses now being grown enormously under the Erdogan regime. So there is no one way in which populist authoritarians challenge regulatory governance, but it is challenged, and the model as such is being challenged on all fronts. Next, yeah, and then I will give it to Kerem. So why are the independent regulatory authorities vulnerable? They lack democratic legitimacy, although we know theories of Lausanne and Frank Vibert, who've been explicit about the legitimacy of unelected non-majoritarian institutions. Impartiality is important, and unelected non-majoritarian institutions have representative claims themselves, but in the populist discourse, they don't mean much. IRAs also have a lack of a visible constituency. They cannot mobilize a constituency to defend their position. And now with the decomposing of the multilateral free market global capitalist models under the tariffs of Trump, the rise of protectionism, we also see that this international, transgovernmental, transnational networks also do not form enough protective belts for the model of regulatory governance. So there's the legitimization of, and here you see some pictures, so there's the legitimization of expertise. We will see policy instability and erosion of perhaps long-term credibility in economic governance, but we don't know yet. And what we argue, and then I give it to Kerem, I think, this all requires from us, ask from us that we have to look at our research agendas again. Are we still asking the right questions? Also, empirical reasons. What happens to the credible commitment when politicians no longer abide by rules? But also, are our theories of regulatory governance still the right ones? And do we not need to theorize again? So I let it with this, and I give it to Kerem.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Oh, yeah, thanks. So based on these empirical and some theoretical, like a questioning of the current trajectory and what we might see simply in the future. So this is data from Leiden. So what it looks at this, I mean, just a very rough picture of what we have been seeing, at least, I mean, since mid-1990s, like onwards. So this is liberal democracy index, a very rough. We are aware of those like limitations of those like data sets and those like surveys, etc. I mean, it's just like provide us some sort of, it's a rough idea about like, what we are actually observing, to put it in a chart and to like observe it over a period. So so these are like 6 countries, for example. We have in our currently in our special issue, there are like a few more. But this overall picture is like mostly regulatory quality. I mean, has been in overall has been observing some pressure, while liberal democracy index has also observed some pressure, like a downward, like a pressure on like especially like even in say it's I mean recovered a bit after like elections in Brazil or in like Poland. Now, I mean, probably, I mean, this will go a bit like downward as well. And in Turkey, I mean, it doesn't change like very much still. It's like, I mean, it versus like every day on the news. And there are also like several others like Greece, like Mexico, and you know, like cases. But overall, the problem is we are observing a transformation. Both pressure on liberal democracy, and which also, I mean, goes correlates like, significantly with the quality of regulation around the world across jurisdictions. So what we offer in this paper is, and also what we and our special issue hopefully, I mean, like, we'll like touch upon will on those like 5 areas that we might, I mean, need to readapt and then also expand our like horizons empirically, theoretically, analytically, and perhaps even say conceptually. And these are, I mean, those 5 areas. To start with the first, so so in this area we are questioning whether those are, so what are those mechanisms the populists are using to weaken regulatory autonomy, and also under what conditions do these strategies succeed? So what are those control strategies? And also before that, it might be useful to just to note again, so why do we care about IRAs, independent autonomous regulatory agencies, autonomy? Because so as the regulatory governance model was like, I mean, arose on the expectations and also to deliver credibility to actors in the market and even citizens, some stability while like avoiding time inconsistency problems of, I mean, especially, I mean, arising from the electoral cycle, and also to give longer term horizon to the actors in the market. And with formal autonomy, although it does not really, I mean, purchase de facto, I mean, actual autonomy for sure, to refer to our great colleague Martino Maghetti's work and onwards. So we know, I mean, de jure autonomy does not really, I mean, guarantee de facto autonomy, but at least formal autonomy, de jure autonomy, try to insulate from daily political interventions. Yet, as Bowman Papadopoulos in 2022 paper like puts it, like to understand those populists and those bases of their behaviors. So to say, immediacy is one of their I mean features of policymaking styles and their, I mean, actions, behaviors. So what this means, it translates into time inconsistency problem. And they are, I mean, like in a rush to say deliver, and they do not really get into those compromises, for example. So what this means for regulatory agencies and their autonomy is they could be considered as veto players, and therefore to deliver your political agenda, which is mainly like presumably transformational agenda, coming from your electoral like promises and your mandates, then you, I mean, tend to control those autonomous agencies. So what are those strategies? You de-delegate, you politicize leadership through patronage appointments. You may cut, I mean, budgets as it happened in Brazil, for example. Even before Bolsonaro arrived, I mean, Temer's government started this austerity, especially after the crisis in, I mean, economic downturn and the crisis in Brazil. There are informal attacks, as we see even in Gabriela Lota's like many like works, for example, on Brazil, through and which may cause even moral injury among bureaucrats and even alienation among bureaucrats, as they may feel like powerless and even lose their, I mean, attachment to their, I mean, daily work and their role in the society and even in the state apparatus. So challenging the public sector motivation even. So and populists also curtail formal authority by changing legal structures, legal arrangements, as for example, reducing the terms of, say, regulatory agencies like boards, the like chairman, or even reduce their like autonomy like by increasing executive role and oversight over them. And what would be the consequences? For example, the spike in inflation rate is in, I mean, now there's like a basket case in Turkey, for example, or as we have seen in a couple of, I mean, weeks ago, not so, I mean, far, with Trump's, I mean, threat to topple, I mean, Powell from, I mean, Fed's chair. Then we have seen a sell-off in the bond market. And this volatility, especially through those, trade, and now, it is even, higher than the pandemic and even like close to the financial crisis of 2008. So such volatility and those, long-term horizon and this credibility and the stability could be just challenged, even if, destroying them could be, easier while building it. So how could it, for example, populists pursue short-term policy objectives, versus long-term stability? So while they are dismantling policies like in Brazil, they might just, deregulate, but they may also lose policy coherence, as we have seen in Turkey, for example, with policy accumulation figured or even dismantled. As we know, regulatory governance operates on the basis of an implicit public service bargain, which is delegation. And then there is, ex post also interaction between the populists and regulators in the form of portraying them as unelected, unaccountable, technocratic veto players. And then you then contest the core institutional logic of regulatory governance and establishing, maintaining those organizational instruments, which are, autonomous regulatory agencies. If you go back to the Christopher Hood's, NATO model, so these are like most, regulatory agencies are organizational instruments. And then we are, redeploying them, reconfiguring them, repurposing them, or even just dismantling them. So then what are those, the instruments, for example, that could, replace, or how could you then redeploy, reconfigure those, the same organization instrument for different purposes, perhaps, which could, lead to institutional, say, drifts or even layering, so to say. And then in this area, we are asking how populists attempt to renegotiate or just negotiate, or even do not even negotiate, but just, do like whatever they want, and they dismantle public service bargains, and how they frame those assaults, such as the moral, economic, political, cultural basis of those frames, and what they really mean in terms of, any like variation in their implications. So how does, for example, weakening of autonomy lead to long-lasting institutional decay in the future? And the third area is market responses. So, for example, once, for example, Donald Trump, engaged in this, rhetoric, say, this verbal attack on Jeff Powell, we have seen this bond market sell-off. This is reaction from the market actors. Yet, could they really tame those populists by giving such negative feedback? And whether they learn or they understand, or whether they just adapt their strategies to go, say, slower gradually, as for example, say Erdogan did, but Trump seems to be a bit in a rush to like going like fast, but also breaking things really quickly apart. So populists also do not merely seek to control those agencies, because they also want to reward or even penalize certain actors. That's why also we, in a forthcoming paper, Kutsal, I, and Özel Beleli are like proposing a coalition of politics, approach to understanding politics administration nexus with a like focus on Turkey. So in this, like similar to this like a paper, so there are like coalitions that even those populist leaders need to serve, and they arise, and they need to serve these political, economic constituencies, such as in the case of agribusiness and Bolsonaro. So this coalition led to the deregulation of the Amazon region, or there is strategic compliance by firms under pressure from authoritarian populist governments, as we are looking at with Fulya, Dora Pioshka, and I in a separate paper on instrumentalization of the banking sector to serve Orban's and Erdogan's own economic and political objectives, agendas. Certainly, yet, I mean, business does not always, I mean, it cannot be always co-opted, as you observe. I mean, in Germany, business mobilized against the far right. But still, so the big tech, as Kutsal mentioned, this oligarchic, I mean, coalition, we might not even be, say, worried about regulatory capture, but this coalition seems to be achieved state capture, say capturing the neurons, I mean the inalic brains, I mean this executive, not just I mean those I mean simple individual institutions, but they are actually now managing perhaps. And
Kerem,
yeah.
Kerem, can we rush? We
Sure.
don't want to take too much time because we want.
Okay, yeah, sure. I'm just okay. So finally, we are asking whether the extent of business alignment strategies can keep populists limited, and also we still need to question how to control IRAs and centralization policy processes can be avoided against populist encroachment. And now I pass the floor to Prof. Ioannis.
Thank you, Kerem. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be with you. I'll try to be as brief as I can. So the fourth research area is about transgovernmental regulatory networks and their role. So the question is if such networks can act as a barrier to populist attacks. This first requires acknowledging the frequently multi-level nature of regulatory governance. So what we know is there's a substantial body of literature suggesting that when national regulatory bodies are part of transnational networks, this facilitates their emancipation from domestic governments. However, existing scholarship mostly refers to networking within the system of the European Union. And the question, of course, is to what extent these networks are an effective barrier to the usually also more aggressive interventions of populist governments. Populist governments portray these networks, and they do the same for international organizations, as unaccountable technocratic structures. They seek to regain national control over decision making, so we may expect them to seek to weaken agencies' ties to transnational bodies. There's evidence from Hungary and Poland, for example. But on the other hand, the European Union recently became more assertive against domestic executive aggrandizement, and we can expect in such a context that populist leaders become more hesitant to engage in radical de-delegation. Also, research in Brazil shows that bureaucrats have mobilized networks to counter pressure from the Bolsonaro presidency. So the available evidence is still unsystematic on the tensions between populist claims of sovereignty and transgovernmental regulatory governance. So we need more solid responses to research questions that to some extent are similar to those that have already been mentioned. So the first key issue again here concerns populist strategies. Some populist leaders delegitimize these networks, they advocate withdrawal from them. Others pursue more subtle forms of neutralization or at least of disengagement, limiting agency cooperation with their international counterparts, selectively ignoring compliance obligation, and so on and so forth. Also, I think it's important to know if in some policy domains are more vulnerable to populist contestation than others. A second critical question, in my view, concerns what follows populist attacks. Do populist attempts to neutralize the effects of participation in regulatory networks? So do these attempts remain confined in, let's say, the backstage of quiet politics or not? Do the transnational networks themselves remain passive spectators of domestic developments, or do they adopt a more activist stance? In a study of one of these networks I did a few years ago, I noticed the existence of dissonant views and debates among network participants on the role of the network in the face of domestic democratic backsliding. So this is just a sample of important research questions. Kerem, can you maybe change slide? Thank you. No? Yeah, lens 5, thank you. And now we come to regulators' responses. Well, the conventional frameworks that are commonly used to study bureaucratic responses, well, they apply primarily to organizations and civil servants that are part of the traditional political administrative system. And these actors engage mainly in internal resistance strategies. Now, what we expect from independent regulatory agencies is that they may have an ability to resist populist influence through maintaining their de facto autonomy despite the pressures. We know, what we know from existing research is that autonomy is not only cultivated, sustained by transnational linkages, as we have just seen, but importantly through other bureaucratic strategies as well, such as the building of reputational capital. So we may therefore expect regulatory agencies to primarily defend their independence by capitalizing on the role, which is criticized, of course, as neutral and expert enforcers of rules. This suggests that regulatory agencies may opt for relying on alliances to maintain their autonomy. So we need to know with whose support regulators can count. Agencies have established a strong reputational capital with economic actors, civil society stakeholders. And if this is the case, then we can expect them to be better positioned to resist political interference, thanks precisely to the existence of supportive coalitions. This has been particularly evident in the case of financial regulatory bodies who benefit from external validation, and this constrains the ability of governments to interfere. There have also been some cases where regulators even managed to turn political attacks into opportunities to reaffirm their indispensability. As again in the case where financial regulators responded to populist-driven market instability through decisive interventions, managing thus to reassert their position. Now, beyond alliances with different various constituencies, regulators also engage in strategic adaptation. They adopt tactics of selective compliance, adhering, for example, to populist directives in less critical areas, while trying to shield the core regulatory functions from political influence. In Turkey, for example, agencies have maintained their de facto independence through adaptations and informal negotiations, even though their formal legal autonomy has been constrained. So this allows to maintain operational discretion without engaging into a direct confrontation with the government.
Ioannis,
yes.
Can you go to the conclusion, because we are short on time?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. The conclusion. Well, I think it's important to note that independent authorities, they emerged under the pressures of globalization, liberalization. Their design was driven by shifts in public administration models. Now, today, the rise of populism takes place in a dramatically different context. The same features that enabled regulatory governance to flourish, as we said, reliance on expertise, insulation from politics, they have now made these authorities become a target for populist leaders who reject constraints on executive authority that is supposed to incarnate the people's will. So this threatens not only the authority, sometimes even the existence of regulatory institutions, but also, of course, this has been said, economic predictability, stability. More fundamentally, it challenges principles of democratic governance, if we consider non-majoritarian bodies to be an integral part of the architecture of liberal democracies. Despite this, we believe that the resilience of the regulatory state is also a plausible scenario. agencies that are embedded in international regulatory frameworks, legitimized through strong reputational capital, supported by institutional safeguards. They should be equipped to resist populist interference. So in our paper, we outline a research agenda that highlights the need to study how the regulatory state deals with populist pressure. And to summarize, the future scholarship must, in our view, examine, well, populist strategies to control and weaken independent authorities, the conditions under which these authorities can maintain or not their autonomy, the role of different kinds of actors, such as business elites, market actors, transgovernmental networks, and the strategic responses of agencies to populist threats. We think that understanding these dynamics is essential for regulatory governance in an era of turbulence. Well, I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you for your attention. And I give now the floor back to David, who I think wishes to make some comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kutsal, Kerem, and Ioannis. Let me take the screen, the slides, so you can see me. Or Kerem, can you help me remove the slides? Do you hear me? Yeah, good.
Yes, now we hear you.
Yeah, and I will join you to the screen.
But now you're frozen.
And I have some comments, but I will be very short because I want to allow for discussion. We have a lot of leading scholars with us, and let us hear them as well. So thank you so much for an excellent paper, very important one. Indeed, a research agenda.
Seems to be frozen.
Research agenda.
Can you hear us, David?
Setting. I hear you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, good. So thank you so much for this paper. I will just add the things that I think are major or useful to think about. First of all, and mostly important, the regulatory state is democratic state, is part of the democratic state. So democracy and democratization process are beyond this kind of the rise of the demand for regulation, not necessarily a demand for independent regulatory agencies, but the regulatory state is about the demand for regulation, the demand to supply of regulation. Now, this particular form of supply of regulation via independent regulatory agencies shouldn't conceal the impact of regulation. Most of the regulations are not coming from independent agencies. And while independence is important, this independence reflects political compromise where regulation represents democratic ambition via the rule of law, not the demand for the rule of person. It's not about personalization. It's not about the guys that we elected, the prime minister or the minister, etc. It's about the rule of law, how to govern the market and society, culture, our moral behavior via regulation. And this is growing and continue to grow all over. And the populist attack is not only about regulation. It's not an attack only about regulation. It's about a version of the democratic states that they don't like. It's an attack on the liberal order, on the rule of law more generally. We can see it with Trump more clearly and more with all the ideological and the cultural aspect of the American system. And this attack on the democratic state, it's also the response to it will also determine the future of the regulatory state, right? So the war is on several fronts, and there will be no one way or one front that will determine all the outcomes. You need to win in many fronts. And I don't think the regulatory state is the weakest front in this regard, because the legitimacy that is based on democratic rulemaking is very, very important. So I would say that my own contribution in the past for the regulatory state literature was missing something, and that this is the democratic context of the rise of the regulatory states. I was putting too much on the economic context of the rise of the regulatory state. And now when we're coming to populist attack, I see it more in a more, say, comprehensive way, attack on the liberal order, tariff, and so on, and all type of social type of regulation, from economic to the social. Now, major aspects that I see is the effort to put the power in the executive, it's a personalization in Trump and Erdogan and Netanyahu or all those guys.
I think no form of state is neutral. Every form of state empowers some agendas and some societal interests at the expense of others. And if it was true that the regulatory state was doing so well for us all, then where is this populist discontent coming from? Where are all the signs of state failure and collapse in the West coming from? It's not intrinsic to democracy either. It seems to me the regulatory state is present in many authoritarian contexts, including China, which I've written on. The second point is your slide on your sixth slide, I think, which shows the lines on liberal democratic index and then regulatory equality. There is no strong correlation there, which I think kind of undercuts what you're saying, and it certainly undercuts the association between liberal democracy and regulatory state. It suggests the regulatory state is more robust than we think. And perhaps that is because the regulatory state is not the form taken by democratic rule and liberal democratic rule, it's the form taken by neoliberalism.
Thank you so much.
And this leads to the third point, which is that populists don't seem to be very good at dismantling or taming the regulatory state. That may well be because the regulatory state is quite robust, or it may be that they don't really have an alternative to neoliberalism. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you. Thank you so much. The next one to speak is Jonathan, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much. Stimulating and timely agenda. So I want to raise some questions about how well this picture fits with the European Union and what some of the implications might be theoretically. So, I mean, in a certain sense, even though you talk at various points about transnational networks and multi-level governance, it's very much a nation-state focused comparative perspective, and it's focused on independent regulatory agencies. Now, I think it's understandable, but it's also, in certain respects, problematic. I think we could say that today the EU is the most important regulatory polity in the world, but it is not a regulatory state in your sense. For one thing, it has hardly any, if at all, independent regulatory agencies in the same sense that member states do. The typical pattern are networked agencies in which national regulators play a critical role and work together with European officials and institutions. And that's true even of what's usually considered to be the closest counterpart to a national independent authority, which would be the European Central Bank. Now, I do think at the same time that we see some echoes of challenges to political challenges to the form that regulation has taken in the EU, but they come from different sources, or at least through different channels. So the two things that I would bring up and ask you to react to are the backlash against the European Green Deal. Now, that mostly arguably comes from national responses to populist pressures, which are filtered up to the European level through the Council and the European Parliament. But then there is also the new agenda of counterposing competitiveness to regulation, which we see in the Draghi report, and also to some extent the Commission's response to that. And that is interesting because it is driven by geopolitical and geoeconomic motivations, and is also seen to some extent as a response to dangers of populism, Trump, etc. So the question is, if we want to think about the regulatory state and the global trends, it would be important to be able to fit the EU into that, and to make the analysis a bit less nation state focused. It doesn't undermine the trends you're identifying at the national level, but it complicates them.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And John Braithwaite, please.
I didn't have a question to ask at the moment. I didn't know I had my hand up. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Andreas, please. Andreas Busch.
Sorry, I was fiddling around and I couldn't find my yellow hand to raise. So thank you very much for the interesting paper. I have a fundamental question, which is about the quality of what you presented is primarily sort of of an anecdotal, sort of case-by-case nature. And so I was wondering whether anybody has tried to have any sort of systematic causal connection, namely, does the attempt to bring down or to reduce the regulatory state, is that positively, is there a connection or a correlation with the amount of either populist governance or the reduction in the VDEM data of democratic quality? Because what I would like, or what I would at least suggest to you, is that wouldn't this paper be improved by sort of having a sort of alternative hypothesis, namely that it might also be that the regulatory state is sort of facing dysfunctionalities, much like its predecessor, the Keynesian state, sort of ran into problems of that ultimately sort of contributed to its decline. So it might be, and just as a hypothesis, that similar things happen to regulation because regulation sort of has costs. And as more regulatory state sort of as it grows, there might be sort of an automatic tendency for it to be reduced, rather than a very sort of active, deliberate attempt to as a sort of political onslaught. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we don't have any more questions, so we'll take your answers.
Yeah.
Kutsal, please divide the time between you and your colleagues.
Yeah, I will address some of the questions that popped up, answers in my mind. Thank you very much. Very good questions. And to be on the status on this paper, this paper is meant to be the opening paper of the special issue. So it charts the bigger picture, and it is anecdotal, very much based on secondary literature, and it tries to raise questions and all kinds of in all areas where other colleagues are much better specialized in. But we thought raising questions at this time would be necessary and needed. And yes, I think one part, Andreas, is to go back and to make more meticulous historical analysis, comparing the rise and decline of different governance systems. That's a very complex process, but that would be something. We are at a turning point, probably, and to find out, to get out of this question mark, we need to do that kind of stuff. To Jonathan about the EU, I think that the regulation in the context of the European Union is not just about independent regulatory authorities and how they cope with pressures from the outside. As a matter of fact, things that were happening in the US also made me think that actually an interesting comparison would be between the US and the EU. I think that the United States system of governance is much, much more vulnerable than the EU system. When they're with Trump, who was very much relying on this theory of the unitary executive, the constitutional theory that developed since under Reagan by conservative lawyers ascribing all power to the president, you see how relatively easy, a system of governance can be disrupted when there is no layers above. And I think that in the system, in the EU governance, I don't think we will see this kind of disruptions as we see in the US, because we don't have a clear executive and many national systems which are very, very different. And as you say in your earlier work, complex architectures which are very flexible and can change. So they're very difficult to get a point from where to capture it all. And but with the Green Deal, and I don't pretend to be an expert on the Green Deal, but you see that the mechanism at the EU level can shift when populist/authoritarian parties also gain political leverage at the EU level, in the Council of State, but also in the European Parliament. That can shift, but still it will be very different than in the US. And the transgovernmental networks and this experimental nature of the EU governance system will bring forth all kinds of different types of elements. But that, as you correctly say, is a different part of study. And when we delineated this paper's focus on the IRAs and implicitly, without really realizing that, to the nation state. There are a couple of questions, but I think not to be long to word. I will give the floor to Kerem or Ioannis to respond to Lee's and perhaps David's points. Thank you very much.
Kerem, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
Just very briefly on Legion's comments. Yes, certainly. I mean, we need to start asking what we have experienced with the emergence and then establishment, now the decay and probably the decline of the regulatory state, but its resilience. That's why also we are we are engaging with the literature and to observe what currently in this populist and with authoritarian tendencies, how this institutional arrangement and this instrument and this apparatus has been experiencing. And certainly, at some point, and this is why are we observing this populist ascendancy, certainly, we go back to the neoliberal policy, the arrangements, which is also one of these, products is the autonomous regulatory agencies and their dysfunctions, which are, I think, connecting us to Jonathan's question here. So certainly those whether those regulatory decisions were democratic in the context, and which takes us to autonomy, technocracy, etc. So all those complexities shall be retreated probably, and this is why also we are trying to engage and question, so to say. But there is certainly valid and significant the points raised by Lee. Yeah. Over to Prof. Ioannis.
If I may add a few words on David's comment. David, you said that the attack on the regulatory state is an attack on democracy. absolutely agree with you that, for example, the value of impartiality that is embedded in the regulatory state is a core democratic value. And I agree that maybe we have emphasized too much the contribution of regulatory authorities for policy efficiency, less so the role for ensuring impartiality. By the way, this is also the role that is assigned to courts, making impartial judgments, decisions. So I would say that it's not an attack on democracy, it's an attack on liberal democracy, because liberal democracy entails the existence of counterweights, checks and balances, counterpowers. And the rule of law is a core ingredient of liberal democracy. Now, political liberalism and democracy are not necessarily coterminous. It's one narrative of democracy. The populists also have their own narrative of democracy, which is a very different narrative. Huh? It's a narrative of, we call it direct majoritarianism. Regulatory bodies or the judiciary system, they are not seen as necessary counterweights. They are seen as illegitimate veto players. So I think the populist narrative, the populist narrative is not less a democratic narrative than the liberal narrative. It's one that we may personally dislike, but they are concurrent narratives, and there are fights between these narratives.
Absolutely. We are towards the end, but just one last comment. So when we are speaking about change and a take on regulation, we should not forget that the take is also on governance. So we are using the term regulatory governance, and we're speaking about a shift from regulatory government to regulatory governance. And what we see with the populists is the desire to return to government. I call it monocentric against polycentric governance. Their vision is concentration of power in the executive. And in this regard, they are different from the neoconservative, the Reagan and so on. So there are changes there. This is also about the concentration of power, and in this sense, and a different vision of democratic or democracy, one that is not being governed by rules but by discretion, which is concentrated in the executive in this case. Thank you so much, all. We just started a discussion in a period which brings governance and regulatory governance again to the center of attention, especially if the Trump reforms and other populist reforms or distractions or chaos will continue to be part of the political map. We'll come back to this very, very timely and important issue. Thank you so much to you, Kutsal, Ioannis, and Kerem, and all of you who participated in the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for organizing.
Thank you.